Hi, welcome to this video in which I completely will break down my track called Butters. Butters is a track on my dubstep album called Dab, which you can download from Bandcamp. And actually, at the moment of recording this video, the album isn't released yet. But when you're watching this video, it is. So it's kind of a time warp thing. So I can't tell you how many tracks are on the album. I can't. Well, I have 2 more tracks ready for the album already, so I can play a few snippets of those. This video came to be because I wanted to do several things, really. First of all, I wanted to make a video about Berlin School, or how you can use Berlin School techniques to create songs and sequences in a modular system. While this track isn't really, well, you can't really consider this Berlin School, it kind of evolved from doing that kind of sequencing, which goes to show that you can use any concept or any idea or technique for any kind of genre that you want. I also wanted to do another patch from scratch video, which this isn't completely, but well, it's something similar. And at some point I wanted to make a video where I show you my current mixing process inside the box, so in Ableton, what plugins I use, which settings, etc. So you have an idea how I finish my tracks, and well, because I think that's interesting if you want to learn. So I thought I'd kill 3 birds with 1 stone and make this kind of video. By the way, I really always feel weird using that proverb, killing 3 birds with 1 stone, because, well, I'm very much opposed to killing any animal. In fact, I'm probably the literal example of someone who wouldn't hurt a fly. I'm not going to go off on a tangent about veganism or politics. I know you're not here for that. This video is constructed in 2 main parts. The first part is me just going through the patch on the system, explaining what VCO I used for which voice, how I did my sequencing, well, everything you need to know about the patch. And then in the second part of the video, I take you inside the computer and we have a look at everything I added to the track and how I finished the recordings with compression, equalization, saturation, etc. to create a polished, finished piece that I'm actually really proud of. I think it turned out really great. So let's have a look at the system first. Let's have a closer look at the patch. It's actually not that complex of a patch. It's rather straightforward, but I did use a couple of well, interesting tricks, I guess. Let's bring down the drums and also this one, and let's just focus on this main dreamy sequence here. Everything starts at 3 body. For the 2 main sequences I'm using saw waves, and then for the bass I'm using a square wave. There's going to be a lot of adjusting for this video. To create this sequence I used a clock divider, which I'm feeding a clock from Pamela's new workout, and also a reset trigger, just so it's always the same pattern whenever I press start. 3 of the outputs of this clock divider are going into an attenuating mixer. So the outputs of that clock divider, at least 3 of them, are going into this mix mode here that I'm using in mixing mode. You might think that's in the name already, but well, you can set this switch here to attenuate, and then we're not mixing the channels down to the last output here. Let me attenuate this last channel here. So we're just listening to the effect of the clock division outputs. I'm running this mixed output into scales to, well, quantize it. But you'll see when I attenuate these divisions more or less, the melody we get changes drastically. Now it's going to be hell to get back to where I started, but well, it's just interesting to show you that you can use a clock divider, an attenuating mixer and a quantizer to create interesting ARP-like sequences, dreamy patterns. I really like doing this. I think if I zoom out a little bit more, that you can just see mimetic digitalis here. I'm just using 1 row, so 4 steps of this sequencer, and I just manually tuned these. I'm using this for sequencing the bass, which I will show you later, but I'm also using the output, the same notes as the bass, to mix in here on the mix mode. But I have inverted its effect, so whenever the bass note goes up, there's a negative voltage added into the mix that I already have here, which results in a sequence that, well, not really follows the bass, but it changes whenever the bass note is changing as well. And if you send in like a randomized voltage into something like this, into a setup like this, this can really create cool stuff. In terms of voice, I'm using, like I said, a saw output from 3 body, and I'm sending it through this Synta system VCF, which is one of my favorite filters because it has such a unique quality that I really like. There is no VCA for this voice. I just turned down my filter frequency completely, and I'm feeding an envelope into the CV input here, which adjusts the frequency. So this is kind of half of a classic subtractive synth patch. It's really a classic synth patch minus the VCA part. As a trigger for the envelope, I'm also using one of the outputs of the clock divider. So really, with just a clock divider, an attenuating mixer, a quantizer, and an envelope generator, well, and of course some kind of voice, you can create at least this kind of sequences. As you can hear, there is also some delay going on. I will try to show you this freehand here. So bear with me for a moment. So this voice is running through the Vino Echo. Which is also clocked by one of the outputs of the clock divider. Now let's focus on the bass. And let's turn all of this wobble madness down. The bass is, Well, actually, I told you at the start that I'm using a square wave for the bass. That's not true. I'm using a saw wave as well. The square wave is for the third voice. Anyway, so the saw wave of 3-body, I'm using the center channel, is running into a MA35. I'm very proud to say that I have 2 now. Yay! I really like that filter. So I was able to get my hands on a second one, which is really nice. I also want a second discrete SVVCF so I can really do a full stereo signal path. Anyway, I've added a little bit of phase modulation here on 3-body, and since I used all 3 voices and all 3 voices on 3-body or all 3 VCOs are getting different sequences, it wasn't really interesting to use the normalized connections for phase modulation. So I connected an output of another VCO. I'm using cycle 5. I connected the sine output into the phase modulation input here, and I sequenced the notes of this secondary VCO with Mimetic Digitalis as well. I just manually tuned the notes so they sound nice when used for phase modulation. And you can hear when I bring this in, you get that nice metallic, well, typical dubstep wobble. Well, it's not a wobble yet, but I think this sounds really great, especially through that filter. I'm sending an envelope to both the CV input and the CV input, well, to both the CV input for the frequency and the CV input for the VCA. So this is actually a full-on subtractive synth patch with a VCO that is getting phase modulated. Not phase modulated, but phase modulated. To get the wobble, I synced my dual LFO to the clock. Can I show you? It's up there. So this is my dual LFO. It's receiving a clock signal. No, this is not the clock signal, this is a reset signal. This is the clock signal that it's receiving. It's well, this clock signal is used for both sides. One of the sides is set to a sample and hold wave, and I'm using that sample and hold output to modulate the frequency of this first channel here that is set to a sine wave LFO. And this just creates these wobbles that change in speed but are always kind of synced to what's happening in the patch. And I was able to bring this in and out of the mix because I am sending this output into an attenuator, sending it here. So by bringing up this attenuator, I can increase or decrease the wobble effect. I'm also doing this because my filter only has one CV input with an attenuator, the other one is the volt per octave input, so I wanted some control over it. Now let's have a listen to the final voice in the patch. So this third voice is once again using a VCO on 3-body. Now it's the square wave. I'm sending this output into the second MA35 here. The same thing as before. I'm using one envelope to control both the filter cutoff and a level for the VCA. So this is another classic subtractive synth patch. I'm using a Moskwa 2 sequencer to sequence this voice. So I'm using the CV output to control the notes, but I'm also using the gate output of the sequencer. Let me show you. So I'm also using the gate output to trigger the envelope for this voice. The envelope that I'm using to modulate the frequency and the VCA on the MA35. And during the jam I adjusted the length of this sequence. I think originally I started at 5 steps, but I'm not sure. I think I went through 5, 6 and 7 steps. There's no transposition on this voice. This was just going all the time. And I think it creates a nice tension with the other voices because they are moving. Let's bring them in. By the way, the reverb and the delay that you are hearing are also coming from my outboard effects. So there was this Vino echo that I used on this first voice, but everything else is going through some spatial effects as well. Where's the bass? The bass is here. I haven't talked about the drums yet. For the bass, at least for the trigger, I used the 3rd channel on Pamela's new workout here. But in the settings you can kind of set a logic function. Not kind of, you can completely set a logic operation there. And well, the 3rd channel is set to a 4/4 pattern. The 7th channel, which I ORed with the 3rd channel, is doing something else. I think it's a Euclidean setting that I used with a probability skip of around 40%. And by adding this internally, I have a really nice evolving, well, it's not really evolving, but I have a bass drum pattern that's not always exactly the same, which I really like. I wish you could chain a 3rd channel, but I tried and it's not possible. The snare is being triggered by the 4th channel. This is just a steady pattern. The 6th channel here is triggering the hi-hats. And the 5th channel is doing the ghost notes on the snare. Can I? So these notes together with the regular snare, it sounds like this. Kick drum. And then with the hi-hat. I really like how this sounds. I'm not sure if you will be able to see, but the kick drum I'm using here is Crater. The snares are samples from the Samples 2 module by Soundforce, which is a really nice module. And then the hi-hat is just coming from the SLD, also by Soundforce. I think, I'm not sure anymore, but I think I have the Lindrum sound set loaded on there. But I'm just using the hi-hat. And I think that in terms of the eurorack patch, that's about it. Maybe I can show you my mixer here. So apart from the bass, everything is running through this mixer. I have 2 stereo outputs of this mixer connected to 4 inputs of my sound card, and the other 2 inputs on the sound card are connected to the Transmit 2 by Analog, which I'm using to send the bass to my computer. Usually I record all the synths together, so also the bass, but because I really felt like this patch would turn out great, I felt it was worth having the bass on a separate track, well, to be able to mix it in afterwards at a well, proper level, which I will show you in the second part of this video. So I have the drums here. So these 4 channels here are my drums running through these 2 outputs. So I have a send here on the bass, on the kick drum, and this is sending the kick drum into the sidechain input of my compressor, and the compressor is on an insert of my synth bus. So this is without the kick drum going into the sidechain, and if I bring it in, you will be able to hear the difference. There is something weird going on with my setup here. I don't know exactly what's happening. Yeah. Sorry about that. I'm just going to demonstrate it this way without all the reverb. So now you can hear the side chaining on the synth. So when I bring back in the drums, I like to use at least some side chaining for most patches. This makes my mixing challenge a little bit less challenging. For effects here, I'm using an Alesis Quadraverb for reverbs. So this is without, and if I really crank it, you can hear how spacious it gets. I really like how this reverb can sound. I blame Heimbach for this. I also have a Lexicon, what's the number? MPX 500. I use it for like synced delays, which it wasn't, by the way, it wasn't synced. There's a tab. Sometimes it takes a little bit to get right, but well. I like having these on separate mixer channels here, just so I can control well, the level, and I can also control the feedback. So sometimes I'm using feedback for the delay itself. Sometimes I'm sending the delay into the reverb, etc. That's just mixer stuff. This is it for the explanation of the patch. Let's now have a look at the Ableton project that I made after recording a jam with this setup. So here I am in my project. Let's start by just listening to the tracks that I recorded from the modular, just without everything else. So there's 3 tracks recorded. Usually I keep my main synths stereo because, well, all the reverbs and delays are printed on the same track as well. And you can see my drums here are mono, just simply because I didn't pan any of the drums, so I saved some disk space by recording this in mono. And I should have recorded my bass in mono as well, but well, I forgot. The first thing I usually do in that case is throwing on an effect in Ableton that lets me choose one of both sides. So we're really just processing one side, and this will also be really centered, which is important a lot of the times for a bass. Just listen to the drums by themselves. I'll remove all the effects here. So what I usually do immediately, in fact, so the first thing I do is I throw on an equalizer. Simply to see where the punch of my kick drum is, and in this track Creator was set to be punchy around, well, between 100 and 200 Hertz, something like that. And I use this as a reference for my synths. I usually make a little dip in an equalizer there to make a little bit of room for the kick drum. Even though there's sidechain compression, it's not that much, the sidechain compression that I have printed. And it's always a good idea to scoop a little bit of those frequencies out of your well, busy tracks. So that's the first thing I do. And then usually, let's remove this one. And then usually I cut out all the low end. You don't need anything below 30 Hertz really, but I went a little bit lower since this is kind of dubby music, and I wanted the bass to be a little bit boomy. Then I scoop out a little bit around 400 Hertz. It's something I picked up from watching a lot of videos by Warren Hewart on Produce Like a Pro, Sylvia Massey as well. They always cut out like 300, 400 Hertz out of the drums. So I do that as well, since that's the mid range, and that's usually where the mud is anyway. So it's okay. Well, it's a good idea to cut out a little bit of the drums, in my experience. What I then do is almost always add a DBX 160. This is just a nice, what is it, a VCA compressor. This is just to control the kick and the snare a little bit. There's no like clever side chaining going on or difference between the high and the lower frequencies in terms of analyzing or compression. It just compresses when the levels are too high. Then I use a second compressor, the API 2500, which I really like for just about everything. And this is set to pick up the higher frequencies more and then compress. So if there's some low end, it might not pick it up and it might not compress. But if there's like a snare that peaks, it will nicely compress this. And I like to do this because I usually find that my snares are too loud. I don't want them to poke out, so this is a good way to pull them down. So the attack is like 10 milliseconds, and the release is really slow. So it's a longer attack and a slower release. A longer attack and a faster release, sorry. Since this is a mono track, I have everything linked as well. So the left and the right channels are going to look at the same sidechain, are going to compress exactly the same. Then I have a decapitator here, which adds some saturation. Let's go back to the start here. Without. And with. Not only does this help to make like drums cut through on a phone or smaller speakers, because it adds a little bit of high harmonics to the sound. The drums also will be a little bit more compressed or saturated, which is sometimes it's almost the same thing. So that's it for my drums. Let's have a look at the main synths here. I have this nice plugin by Tokyo Down. I don't think I've ever pronounced this out loud. Let's just usually I say TDR because that's also the name of the band. I'm a little bit confused. Anyway, this is a free plugin. And this takes care of the width of the low end, so it makes everything below a certain frequency range. So right now it's 120 Hertz. It cuts out the side signal in a really good way. I used to do this anyway with another plugin of theirs, like Nova, which is a dynamic EQ that I like to use. Which you can also use in a mid-side setup. So I always used to cut out all the low end of the side signal, everything below 200 Hertz. It's okay to get rid of that. Well, not always, but a lot of the times. And then they made this plugin that is just exactly made for that. And well, it does it better. it has something to do with linear phase, and it's all way too technical for me. It's a really nice plugin to put at the front of your chain, because it solves a lot of problems and like boomy low end. Then I have a regular equalizer. I've cut out a lot of the low end. You can see some automation going right there as well. I cut out a lot of the low end, like everything to 100 Hertz, because, well, the bass is on a separate channel. Had the bass be printed on the same channel, on the same track, I wouldn't cut away everything so high, of course. And then for my synths, I do the same thing I do for my drums. First, a DBX 160 to take care of the overall amplitude and volume, and then an API 2500 to control the spiky upper range. For my synths, the attack is faster, the release is a little bit slower, and as you can see, I used a ratio of 2/1, which is a really gentle compression ratio. It might seem that I use a lot of compression, but my ratios are rather low. On the DBX it's 3, and there's barely any compression going on. The same for the API 2500. Then I have another sidechain compressor added here at the end, which gets sidechained by the complete drum track, but there's an equalizer on the sidechain, so it's looking at everything around 100 Hertz. So it's only looking at the punch of the kick drum. And this is just, again, to make some more room. I'm not going for the Benny Benassi style sidechain sound. But I like it when you can hear the pumping a little bit. Now the bass. So, like I said, on the bass I have this utility plugin that chooses one of both sides. Then there's an equalizer. Again, I'm cutting out a little bit of the 100 to 200 Hertz range, because that's where the punch of my kick drum is. I'm also cutting out a little bit around 300 Hertz to take care of the mud. Again, you can see some automation going on there. Once again, I have the DBX 160 first. There were a lot of dynamics in this bass, but it's best not to compress bass too much. But I felt in this track it could, it was good to compress it a little bit. Then I have a Pultec here. Normally I don't put this on separate tracks, but I felt the bass could use a little bit more roundness. Well, what the Pultec is good at is giving you a lot of oomph in the low end and then scooping out room for everything else, like 200, 300 Hertz. So that's what I used it for. Can I? Yes. Let's remove these things. So this is the sound with the Pultec. And now without. Let's bring it back in. Okay, and then I have another decapitator which adds again a little bit of grit, which helps to get this sound across on tiny speakers. Let's take it out. There's also an obvious level boost. There's like auto correction here on the capitator, but it's always a little bit louder. They're just trying to fool us, really. And then another sidechain compressor to compress the bass whenever the kick drum hits. Sometimes, like on the drums, sometimes I put a de-esser on the drums when the hi-hats or crash cymbals or whatever, when they are annoying me. Just putting on a de-esser can be a really useful way to get rid of those harsh frequencies. Same goes for guitars, by the way, and sometimes I even put de-essers on my synths. So let's have a listen to what else is going on here. Let's listen to this segment here first. Yes. So this sound is actually from a free VST that's made by Spitfire Audio, a very well-known brand for virtual instruments. And they put out this free VST that gives you access to a whole orchestra, and the samples are really, really, really good. You can make convincing orchestral music with this. No doubt about it. But I used a horn sample, or the horn instrument, which was a little bit, well, out of place. It felt a little bit wrong. As you can hear, there's a ton of distortion on it, again from the capitator. So without, and then with. That's the thing with the capitator, it sounds really, really good when you use it at the right moment. You can see there's quite a lot of low end and high end that's been cut out. There's a delay here. There's this little plate that I really, really like. It's a really nice plate reverb plugin. Let's remove it. Let's remove the delay as well. With the delay and the reverb back in, you can hear it just gives the sound a little bit of width, and that's what I wanted, because I want my center really to be the drums and the bass. I felt every sound that was in the center was getting pushed away by the intense bass that we made, or that I made. So I wanted the additional sounds to be a little bit wider. And then I used this filter that's automated. I felt that was really fitting with the genre of the track. look at some instruments first. So these are just the typical reggae chords. One layer is using a free synth, by the way, in the Decent Sampler platform. I made a few plugins for Decent Sampler. This is like a free platform with, well, hundreds of user-made plugins like this one. There's also paid versions of most things. Well, this is just a generic organ sounding patch. Can I? It's just basic synth stuff. Again, with some decapitator on it and a little bit of tube compression. Also a lot of equalizing on there. By itself, it sounds like this. So nothing extraordinary there. I recorded a guitar as well. This is just with a nice Telecaster. Telecaster? A Tele. Some compression, some grit. And then, well, this is kind of a chorus, flanger, phaser chorus, I'm not sure. It's a free plugin by Valhalla. Again, to push it to the side because I was feeling it was getting pushed away by the bass. And together they sound like this. And there's more layer, one more layer with instruments. This is just me playing some boomer bends on my guitar. Again, a little bit of compression, a little bit of grit. The same widening processor, some chorus, and there's also some side chaining on there. Then I added some drums as well. Here I have some tambourines. Mind you, these are mixed in really, really well, silently. You can almost not hear them. Listen how silent these are. Sometimes I like to add stuff where you can't hear it really, but you hear there's something different when you take it away. It's a good practice to do when adding reverb and stuff as well. And even compression. Bring it down until you think you cannot hear it any longer, and then remove it entirely. And if you still notice a difference, usually that's a good point. I also added some claps. And let's listen to this together with the drums. So these are the eurorack drums. Let's bring in the tambourines. I did this just to create a little bit of a stereo feel in the drums, because it's so very mono otherwise. So the tambourines are panned left and right. The same for the claps, those are also panned left and right. Let's bring them in. And then there's these risers. These are just reversed hi-hats and claps and stuff. It's something I like to do right before a snare hit, like a riser. Let's listen to it. I like how that gives a track like more energy. It just slaps harder, I don't know. I like it. And then there's these long risers here, like in a build-up. You can hear there's also some delay on a send there. If you hear it in context. And there's one more thing I need to show you. I used some samples from the movie Sunshine. There's a scene where like Pinbacker is talking to the main character. It's like the villain and the good guy. And the villain type is really raspy and really breathy. And I used some of the parts as risers or just little effects in the distance. Let's listen to it together with the drums. Let's add the risers. This just adds some stereo information to those moments. I also cut out some of the text he's saying. But as you can see, there's quite heavy equalization. I added some grit, well, a lot of it with Decapitator. And again, some widening to get it away from the center. There's a longer segment here as well.
Who are you?
Which in context sounds like this.
At the end of time, a moment will come when just one man remains. And the moment will pass. The man will be gone.
I have like a small room reverb on a send effect. I mainly use this to widen my drums a little bit. It's one of those things that I turn down until I can't hear it anymore. But for this track I added like 3 more send effects. There's like the little plate, like the plate reverb plugin that I sent a lot of stuff to. And then there's 2 delays. They're both ping pong delays. One is to two, what is that, 16 notes, and the other one are like half notes. Those are mixed in very, well, very silently, because I felt there was already a lot of width in the original recordings. And things can get quite muddy quite quickly. Let's have a look at the tubas. I threw on like the Peltec, which adds a round bass but scoops a little bit of, well, it makes room for everything to breathe. Then there's the API 2500 that I use as kind of a glue compressor. You can see it's barely doing anything. Then I have this mastering compressor, which is, well, mainly adding some saturation. It's doing a little bit of compression, but as you can see, it's not even doing half a dB of compression, so really just touching the peaks. Then I have a multiband compressor from Ableton natively. And then there's this waves limiter that I use. And I always limit to -6 dB for everything I put on YouTube. There's been moments that I go to 5, but the last few months I always go to 6. I feel that's just a good level to be listening at. So that's it. That's my complete mix explained for you. And even though it might look like I do a lot, it's all of the things are doing very little. I use a lot of things that do very little. That in the end give me the sound that I want. Let's head over to the outro of this video. That's it for this video. It was a behemoth to edit, but a lot of fun to make. I always enjoy trying out new things, exploring new territories in terms of videos. So I'm really excited I can put this kind of thing online and that you are actually watching it. And by the way, the whole Berlin School idea that I started, well, I talked about at the start of the video. I made a Berlin School patch and that kind of evolved into this track. The whole idea to make a video about Berlin School in the first place came from a member of my Discord who was curious about how to pull this off with simple sequencers and simple modules, since the original Berlin School people didn't have all the tools we have right now. And sometimes it's good to kind of step down and do things the easy way. But that aside, if you want to be able to suggest video ideas or just discuss topics, learn from each other, etc., you can do so by, well, supporting me on Ko-fi or on Patreon. You can do so for as little as, I think the minimum amount on Ko-fi is €2, but that can even be a one-time donation, and this also gives you access to the Discord server. So, well, I'm a cheap fuck, what can I say? All jokes aside, I really enjoy the sense of community. I know there's other people on the Discord that really enjoy this as well. It's not always about exclusive content. Just having a few people to talk to, throwing around ideas, or just sharing how your day went. Sometimes that's enough. Thank you very much for watching. I really hope you learned something. See you next time. Bye.